Today marks the fourth anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Well, at this stage, I think that we realize 4 years into this war that the resolve on both sides has not changed yet. It remains what it was before. That Vladimir Putin is now 73 years old. He had his birthday just now on October 7th. And going ahead, his life is only going to get shorter. It's not going to get any longer.
In your view, is it possible that those in Putin's inner circle might remove him? Hello everyone, my name is Alex, and if you see my traditional Ukrainian haircut and I'm wearing a Ukraine t-shirt, that means I'm Alex from Ukraine. And today we are joined by a very special guest, PhD, Kyiv-based national security strategist, YouTube creator, Jason J. Smart. Jason, thank you for joining us today.
It's good to see you, Sasha.
You mentioned that the Kremlin is introducing the digital ruble to enable total control over citizens' spending, since the traditional banking system lacks the necessary tools. In your view, can this technology prevent a long-term economic collapse, or will it simply accelerate Russia's shift over a shadow barter economy?
So it's sort of interesting that they're trying to use things like digital currency. I mean, already there's a lack of faith in the Russian population about cryptocurrencies, and I think it's well founded. The fact is that most people in Russia and Poland say they don't understand how it operates. It's interesting that they want to start off doing things like the pensions first in crypto. What's interesting is it's precisely that population, the older population, that's the least comprehension of how to use crypto. And the majority of Russians of that demographic, of that age group, of that cohort, actually do not have even, let's say, smartphones, and it's going to be very hard for them to manage something like this. So why would the Kremlin really want to do this? And I think that there's really two different reasons. One, it's for control, as you mentioned. The fact is this gives them total control over where your money is. They can see it all the time. They can see where it goes, with whom you do business or receive money, or to whom you send money, and that allows them to trace you. Then it would also allow them probably to figure out where you are all the time. But beside that, there's another objective here, which is Russia doesn't have a lot of money. And this is sort of like dealing with vouchers or coupons. There's no inherent value to this money. It's not clear to what it's related to. Are they just creating numbers and sending it to you, and then you are able to rebate it by going to a store to spend things? And it sounds like it is. I'm not really clear that this is a legitimate currency by any standard. But at the same time, it's all indicative of the fact that today Russia is thinking outside the box as to what to do, because they have less and less ability to have a normally functioning economy.
According to your data, one in 8 Russian billionaires has faced nationalization or asset seizures. Why haven't these influential figures united to push back against Putin out of fear, a lack of leadership, or the hope of reclaiming their assets after the war ends?
Well, there's a few different reasons. One is because they're scared. It is a huge percent. The fact that you have over 12% of all the oligarchs in the country have had their assets taken is pretty shocking. But more than that, I think that another aspect of this is the fact that usually they realize how badly things can end. Look at Mikhail Khodorkovsky as a good example. He spent 10 years in prison in Russia, and that was after the fact that he was the wealthiest person in the country. He was the head of Yukos, the oil company. But Putin had no problem locking him up. So if you're somebody such as recently there was an oligarch actually down in Dagestan who had large businesses there, including the ports, they arrested him. Within a few hours, he agreed to just turn them over to the state, that they should be part of the state's property. That's sort of amazing. This is billions of dollars he just gave away, or hundreds of millions at the very least. Why would he do that?
Today marks the fourth anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, as the country continues to endure this horrific and bloody war. And what do you think the world has learned so far, and what more needs to be done to support Ukraine right now?
Well, at this stage, I think that we realize 4 years into this war that the resolve on both sides has not changed yet. It remains what it was before. And unfortunately, that means that I think the West has not correctly appreciated the situation. For far too long, especially in the beginning of the war, there was this fear of escalation, that too much could be done to upset Russia. But we see that no, in fact, too little has been done against Russia. At this stage, the only solution to end this war is to make sure that Vladimir Putin himself feels that his regime is being challenged, and that his ability to continue ruling is now truly in question. And it's only at that point when he feels that there's a personal risk, when he feels that his ability to continue existing as a dictator of Russia is no longer certain, that he would be interested in negotiating some sort of a different outcome. But at present, he has no motivation to do so. In fact, the West has done its best to make sure that Ukraine does not do things like carry out attacks within Russia for the first few years. And that is why, unfortunately, Russia felt empowered by that and emboldened by that. So today, to change the situation, to have a paradigm shift, it's necessary to change the way that Ukraine is fighting, and that is to carry out increasing attacks across Russia, but specifically against the political leadership of the country.
You compared Putin's isolation to the final days of Nicholas II. In your opinion, what specific event or crisis could serve as the trigger that turns the current apathy of Russian society into open revolt?
I think that the general population of Russia is unlikely to rebel. I mean, in the Red Revolution sense, like 1916, 17. But I think it's much more probable that there be an inner coup within the leadership of Russia. I mean, my hypothesis for a long time has been that this war will only end when Russia decides it will end, first. But secondly, when Vladimir Putin is challenged, and the thing that is most likely to provide that is going to be a significant economic event that destabilizes the country, and at which stage it's no longer possible to continue waging war. And that is possible. I mean, history shows that economic events are usually the precursor to what creates large-scale political events. So right now, I think that my bet would be that internal factions that are currently fighting within the Kremlin, that's very important. The fighting between the FSB and the military, that's also important. But even more important is the fact that their economy is very weak. The banking sector today has a significant liquidity problem. According to think tanks associated with the Kremlin, there's a significant risk of having cascading defaults in the banking sector. That's a pretty big deal. So when you see runs on the bank in Russia, that'll be huge. Already they've put currency limitations of how much money you can take out from ATMs. And of course, they come up with justifications for this. They say it's to prevent fraud, but everyone knows it's not the case. The other thing is they just proposed a new limit of about $650 in rubles that you could take out from within the bank via the teller. That's pretty amazing. Imagine somebody has, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you can only take out $650 at a time. I would be pretty concerned by that. I think I'd be very worried why the bank has my money and doesn't want to give it to me. But these are all signs that the situation in Russia is becoming more and more complex.
On the loss of checks and balances, with Sergei Ivanov removed from the Security Council, are they still mechanisms or individuals within Putin's inner circle capable of dissuading him from using tactical nuclear weapons in the event of critical defeats on the battlefield?
No, it's hard to say, who would likely give what assessment. Now, I don't think that the problem is that Putin does not likely ask for many opinions from his people, like the military folks. It does not appear that he takes a lot of instruction from the intelligence folks either. Rather, he believes certain things and expects people to agree with him. So I think that people that are intelligent would understand why it would be unwise for Russia to escalate things by using something like a chemical weapon or a nuclear weapon. But does he have the people around him that would tell him that? It's hard to say. But overall, we can look at the historic record and say that Vladimir Putin, when he's most challenged, does not accelerate things and start to use nuclear weapons. We look at the Prigozhin uprising as an example. There was a significant risk to his regime. But rather than confront it, rather than attack them even with something like, at all, the military wasn't very successful in attacking Prigozhin. But more than that, Vladimir Putin himself, what did he do? He fled the Kremlin. He flew to Valdai. He got out of town as fast as he could. And that shows you that Putin himself, as a coward, would face with some sort of hostility. So I think that there is probably less people around Putin today than ever before who would speak the truth to him. Putin 20 years ago was a very different person. He's actually, in terms of that, quite open-minded with meeting with people with diverse views. I mean, he was still a dictator. He was still bloodthirsty. But still, he was at least open to meeting with people with diverse views. Today, he's totally closed to that. He only meets with maybe 3, 4, 5 people a day. It's a very small, intimate circle of people he's known for years. And they're people who are very interested in protecting their own self-interest. So I think today it's going to be probably more and more complicated for Putin going ahead as he's making decisions that are distant or detached from reality.
Do you believe figures like Ivanov and Patrushev will accept their humiliation sidelining, or do they retain enough influence within the security apparatus to quietly sabotage the decisions of Putin's new favorites?
So In both cases, we have to understand that these men have known Putin for decades and decades. They were very close, they're intimates, and the fact that they've been pushed out is actually a pretty significant sign. But more than that, I think that we have to understand that they are also playing a long game. We see that within the factions of the Kremlin, the Shoigu faction, which are those who are those who are associated with the former Minister of Defense, Shoigu, they're being pushed to the sidelines very quickly. But Patrushev himself has long-term objectives. His son, obviously, he's got a large political future, he believes. He was a former Minister of Agriculture. The son's partner or wife is the Minister of Agriculture currently, but he himself is the Deputy Prime Minister, and he is considered a very likely person to succeed Putin. So Patrushev very well might have in his mind that it's better to not, cause any problems because he hopes that his son will be able to take over the country one day. But looking ahead, I think that overall they probably do have their own abilities to influence Putin. And there's also the fact that ultimately, for anything to work in a country, you have to assume that people are going to fulfill your orders. For Putin, I'm not absolutely certain that everybody would fulfill the orders as they're supposed to. And then it starts at the very top. If you're the Minister of Defense who gives an order that's illegal, you know how that typically works out for people in the case of Nuremberg. So I think that you would probably be very cautious to do something that was totally crazy, like nuke a country, because at that stage, it will never end. They will pursue you for the rest of your life. So do you wish to survive, or do you wish to fulfill Putin's order? But it would be also very dangerous for Putin to use a nuke for a different reason. It's simply that he doesn't know that they're going to work. Every year, you're supposed to spend millions of dollars to do maintenance on your nuclear arsenal. Russia undoubtedly has not done that for the past 30 years. And since they haven't done that, that means that it's really a big question whether or not they'll work, which would be the worst case scenario for Putin. Imagine going to a knife fight or a gunfight, and all of a sudden you find out that it doesn't work, it breaks. What do you do then? You've pulled out a weapon, and now you've shown that you're very aggressive, but now you can't actually defend yourself. At that point, you're in the most weakest position possible, one. But two, you've forced everybody else to take aggressive action against you to prevent further violence.
You noted that 400,000 National Guard troops serve primarily to protect Putin's regime, but if revenues from the oil and gas sectors continue to decline, will this force remain loyal once the state can no longer afford to pay high salaries?
No, it probably won't really remain around for very long. I mean, Vladimir Putin, I think that's where a lot of people don't understand about the war in Ukraine, and we can see this as a whole. And I think it's a bigger issue than just that. No, they probably would not stick around because they're there for the salary. But more important than that is that people don't understand what the National Guard is. It's very important. It's headed by Viktor Zolotov, who's a former bodyguard to Putin. He's a close intimate. Actually, his clan is probably one of the most dominant clans today in the Kremlin. But Putin, so you understand his psychology and what he's interested in, he has his National Guard of about 350, 400,000 according to the British people. Their primary job is, one, to defend within the country infrastructure, but two, to defend Vladimir Putin. That's their actual job. The real job is that. And that's why it's sort of fascinating. But think about a National Guard. It's usually used domestically for rioting or looting, things like this. But in Russia, finally, they've been given the right to use tanks. But why would they need tanks in Moscow? Because tanks, that's used when you have fighting between armored divisions. They need it in Moscow because they worry about rebellions from the Russian military. And that's just why last year they gave them the ability to use tanks. That's sort of incredible. They're worried about, though, not the NATO tanks, nor the Ukrainian tanks. They don't expect to see those soon. They're worried about Russian tanks if they were to turn against the government. And this all happened after the Prigozhin episode. But let's go a step further from that. Imagine the war in Ukraine. It has, it's very hard to estimate, let's say 600,000 Russian soldiers that are on the front or either very close to the war or directly working the war or near the border of Ukraine. So let's say 600,000. Oh, you can even say 700,000, whatever it is. Imagine there are 400,000 National Guard that are not being used in the war. So why is that? It's just for Vladimir Putin, what is more important, the war in Ukraine or his personal security? And obviously it's his personal security. That's his top priority. It's like the Chechens. A lot of people mock the Chechens, which is fine, but we call them TikTok soldiers because they come and they don't actually fight. They film videos of them so-called fighting, but they just shoot into the air. But why is that? Is it really because they're cowards, or is it because their job is not to fight in Ukraine? Putin doesn't want to waste them in Ukraine. His objective is to use them in Moscow should there be ethnic Russians that seek to overthrow him. He keeps them around to be his Praetorian Guard. That's their objective, not to be in Ukraine. So I think that overall we have to understand that for Vladimir Putin, his incentives, his objectives, first and foremost, is his own security and his regime's stability. And very far second or third is the war in Ukraine. So once we understand that, we understand his prioritization of events, it will help us to figure out how better to attack his regime to make sure we can destabilize it.
In your view, is it possible that those in Putin's inner circle might remove him?
In the short term, it's probably improbable. But, we've discussed before is that ultimately game theory would indicate that we should look at the situation and understand that Vladimir Putin is now 73 years old. He had his birthday just now on October 7th. And going ahead, his life is only going to get shorter. It's not going to get any longer. And as he approaches his terminal phase, people around him understand that, just logically, that the day will come where Putin is no longer. But even if I love Vladimir Putin, I realize that. I knew that day will happen. So what should I do? Well, if I realize that there's other factions within the Kremlin who have the intention of taking power after Putin, and those factions are against me, that they would operate against my interest, then I should realize that I need to be one of the factions that takes control. Because whoever wins after Putin, whoever takes power, undoubtedly will liquidate his opponents. He will kill them and their families and take all their assets. So if you know that's what your future looks like at some point in the next few years, why would you just wait around to see that happen? Wouldn't it be wiser and more strategically wise to go after Putin now, to seize the reins of power right now, which guarantees my own security, my own future, and to make sure that I can be the one that suppresses my opponents? Because if I don't, it means I'm just waiting around to be attacked, to be destroyed. So I think that's a probable scenario, and it's something that will eventually happen. I don't think that Putin's going to end up dying a peaceful death, and that's not because of anything else, but the fact that those around him are all serving their own self-interest first and foremost. So even somebody who he calls friend, I think I'd be very cautious that they're not a Brutus.
The shift from Telegram to the Max platform, reportedly owned by Putin's family, is this merely a tool for censorship and corrupt enrichment, or does it also signal that the FSB has lost control over the army's information space?
So I think that there's several different purposes of this. First and foremost, we should understand that Telegram is not secure. And by the way, Telegram itself doesn't really claim to be secure. If you just read through their literature, the fact is they save all of your information on a server. If you use something else that is secure, like Signal, it doesn't do that. If you have Signal on a new device, it doesn't load your messages because they're all gone. They've disappeared. But Telegram, if you load on a new device, will upload years of your conversations. Where are those stored? Where are those coming from? And the fact is, they're in Russia. But beside that, going ahead, when you look at Telegram, why are they actually limiting it? Yes, they're trying to force people into Max. That is definitely part of the reason. Part two of this is that it gives them the ability to, Max is important so people that don't understand what Max is. It's a government's equivalent of messaging, but also allows them to do other government services via it. But the real objective of having everybody there is it allows them in one place to be able to eavesdrop and read everything that everybody's doing in the country all at once. But with Telegram, there's another thing. If the government already has access to it, why would they want to limit it? Perhaps you recall just a few years ago, there was a large protest in Russia because people thought that Telegram was going to be made illegal. The government did that, I'm absolutely certain, because they wanted people to start using Telegram. This was a means by which they used to get people to switch to Telegram. And by doing that, that was something that gave the Russian government more access to Telegram. That is, let's let everybody think we're going to make it illegal because it's too secure, and hence everybody switches to Telegram, which is in fact not secure. So I think there's an aspect of this. But the third aspect of this as well, a lot of people have noted that the Russian front lines often use Telegram to communicate between themselves. What's fascinating about that is that, yes, since they've turned off Telegram, the Russian front lines have had a problem communicating with each other. So why would that happen? Well, let's remember that the FSB, which is one of the major clans in Russia, and it's by itself subdivided to various clans within it, but as a whole, let's say as a monolith, there's this FSB. They have no interest in seeing the Russian military survive this war. I think that people don't understand the incentives that they have. First and foremost, seeing the Russian military get destroyed is completely fine with them. That is a group that doesn't like them, that doesn't work with them. Historically, they've not cooperated. And it's a group that could actually pose a direct threat to the stability of the Putin regime if they were to turn against Moscow. But more than that, they would be the only ones that physically can take force in the country after Putin dies. And so what you have to do is make sure that you've eliminated them, which then allows your own clan to grow.
Given that senior commanders are afraid to report weapons shortages and generals are imprisoned for telling the truth, as in the case of Popov, how likely is it that mass insubordination will begin not at the top, but among mid and lower ranking officers directly on the battlefield?
I think that that will probably come the day they stop getting paid. It's, I think, actually quite realistic that the day will come. Keep in mind, these soldiers are there. We know the primary reason is economic in nature. They're not there for ideological purposes. For that matter, the Kremlin very rarely anymore talks even about ideological purposes. It almost never talks about, liberating the regions or the Russian speakers or any of this stuff. It's just sort of gone by the wayside. It's become much more transactional and pragmatic. And which the whole war was this entire time that way. It was never about anything ideological. But neither here nor there. I think for the soldiers themselves, if you're in this war right now because you're hard up for cash and they stop paying you, or your currency devalues in such a way that it no longer is worth sticking it out, that could actually very well change the war. Keep in mind, Russia right now is operating a deficit of about 9,000 soldiers a month. They cannot fill their ranks fast enough. There's a town actually in Ukraine right now that's life expectancy for a Russian soldier is about 12 minutes after he arrives on this location. So when you look at this, Russia can't continue this forever. And fortunately, it's becoming more and more critical for Russia to change strategy, but they are not. So let's hope that this continues as the Russians today are running out of both men and cash to continue fighting this war.